Hello and welcome to the Vibe with the 315 podcast. I'm Cam,
And I'm Emily.
and today we're going to be talking about the introduction to the podcast and our backgrounds as sports lovers. So, first of all, I'd like to say that we came up with the name Vibe with the 315 because this is a 315 or Syracuse-based podcast. So most things we talk about are going to be Syracuse basketball, Syracuse football, Syracuse Mets baseball, but that's not all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about NFL, NBA, MLB, college basketball. If there's a big kaflooey or trade or whatever in a different sport, we'll talk about that too. Like, just because we're called Vibe with the 315, it's not limited to 315 sports.
Yeah.
So, a little background about me is I've been a sports fan all my life, mainly baseball. Like, growing up, I was always I love baseball. I was always into it, like the players, the stats, that kind of stuff. But more recently, probably like the last 10 years, I've gotten into basketball and football, especially this year with the football. Like fantasy football keeps me in the loop with it, and like college football, like Syracuse football, I've gotten really into that.
hmm I also have kind of been a sports fan my entire life. It started with baseball for me because my dad and grandpa are very big baseball fans, and also my sister is a big sports fan, all different sports. So she keeps me in the loop with that. And also Cam, we're actually cousins, so we have a lot of the same favorite sports teams and stuff. So we're always talking about sports and that kind of stuff. More recently, probably the past 5 years I've gotten more like serious about actually learning about different sports and what different terms mean and like knowing more players and stats and that kind of stuff. Um, we're big Syracuse men's basketball fans. I'd say the past 5 years we've started going to a lot more games regularly, and we've really kept up on new commits and recruits, that kind of stuff, stats, all that stuff. um, I'd say in like 2019 I got really into the NBA, and kind of over quarantine I started watching more basketball and a little bit of football. And I'd say probably the past year or two got really into football, and last year I got really into Syracuse football, the college football. We've really been keeping up with that. So definitely more recently gotten into sports. So I'm kind of newer with everything. Might not know everything about the sport, but I'm always asking questions and getting more knowledgeable about it. And we got Cam over here who knows everything about sports. So he just teaches me about it, and it's good because I got a good person to ask questions to.
And that's another thing is that we want to like have interactions with the players, like me and Emal. And by the way, I call her Emal because that's just her nickname. That's what I call her. So if you hear me say Emal, that's why. But me and Emal, we like to get autographs at like Syracuse men's basketball, Syracuse
Mm-hmm.
football, Syracuse Mets baseball. Like we like to get autographs and like interact with the players. So we might have stories like, oh, for example, one day Hector Santiago signed 17 cards, or one day this happened, or like random stories
Mm-hmm.
about players. Like we want to share our stories about the players, and like we want to have like a platform to share and to get to know players more. So like we want to do the podcast, but we also want to do shorter form content on TikTok. So like if we go to a game and we say, hey, Quadir Copeland, what's your favorite, drink? What's your favorite rapper, your favorite video game, stuff like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
to interview the players, like we don't only want to be limited to the podcast. We want to have a platform on, let's just say TikTok or Twitter or Instagram, and have shorter form videos that people can watch in like 15 seconds and not have to sit down for an hour, 40 minutes to watch the podcast. Like people can still get to know about the players even if they don't watch the podcast. Like they can still learn stuff from the shorter form content.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason we wanted to start the podcast, because we find it really interesting, like talking to the players and getting to know more about them, on more of like a personal level, not just, their stats. Oh, they hit this many home runs this year. We like to know about the players and stuff. And also, me and Cam, being cousins, we talk pretty much every day. We're always talking about sports. It always gets brought up in conversation. We'll be going over fantasy, or he'll be like, "Hey, Emo, did you see that video of that crazy layup?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, that was crazy." um But we're just like always talking about sports, and we just thought it would be fun and interesting to share some of our ideas and start the podcast.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like recently, a lot of people have been starting podcasts. I've seen Cole Swider's The Swider Show. That one has really caught my eye.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what Eric Devendorf's is called. I think it's a Scorers Table, something along those lines. He's been doing that with like Syracuse players. Like I saw an episode with him and Judah Mintz. Like that was interesting. Just hearing about like Judah's upbringing, like the new guy the new guy in Syracuse. Like he has a similar story to Devendorf. Like
Yeah.
it's cool to hear about that. And like we want to have guests of our own. Like if you have any, if you're watching this and you have any suggestions for a guest that you want to see, we can try to get literally anybody on. So literally leave a comment in the comment section and say, oh, I want this person on the podcast, and we'll literally try to make it happen, like to the best of our ability. And like we want to have guests on and hear from them, like, oh, for example, who has been your favorite teammate or the funniest teammate, or tell me a story about this coach, or during high school, how did this go about, or literally whatever, like whatever questions we have or the fans have. Like if you have a question for Michael Jones, for example, if you want to see him on the podcast and you have a specific question for him, oh, how did you tackle this? How did you get this interception? What do you like? What were your thoughts during this? Literally just comment it and we'll literally like do it. Like we'll ask these people the questions. Like it's just not for us. Like we want the fans to be involved too, and we want the other people to have their questions answered. Oh, for example, this person might be a Syracuse fan, but they might be from Texas, and they'll never see these players in their life. Like they'll never be able to come up to a game or whatever, but they want to know, hey, Quadir Copeland, what's your favorite song right now? And we're on the podcast and we say, hey, Quadir, what's your favorite song? And this person gets their question answered with an opportunity that it might not have been answered without our podcast. We want it to be like a personal level. Like we want to get to know the players and get to know like how they are, not just because they're a player, because they're interesting and like their lives are so different than other people. Like they have to wake up early, go to class. If they're a college athlete, go to class, train, work out, go to practice, have a game, still do homework. Like they're still normal people, but like we want to see like what their life is like still too.
Yeah, so that's like the main goal of our podcast is to get sports figures on, to do interviews, to, get that more personal information and get to know them on a different level. But, that might not happen every week. It might be a little bit difficult to get some players on, but there's still so much we're going to talk about on the podcast. We're going to cover the NBA, NFL, MLB, big news. Obviously, Syracuse football, basketball, Syracuse Mets, and like other AAA teams. We're Yankees fans, so we go to some Scranton games. So the Scranton
as well as
Red
fantasy
Riders.
football too.
Yeah, fantasy football. We've been really into that, so we'll definitely covering some of that kind of stuff. Just talking about big events in sports and like trades and stuff, MLB trades going on. Those are really interesting to talk about and cover. Like Cam mentioned before, we get autographs from players in like the Syracuse area. We have a lot of great stories from that and stuff. So all that kind of stuff you can expect to see on our podcast. And, we'll talk about different stuff every week, but also we'll have like segments every week that will be the same, like, maybe a sports take from Cam or something. So there'll be lots of good stuff we're going to talk about here on the podcast.
Exactly. Every episode will be different. Well, not every episode will have a guest. Every episode will obviously be me and Emal hosting it, but it might just be us sometimes, or sometimes there might be a guest. Sometimes we'll go over fantasy football and actual football, and sometimes we won't. Like it'll be different depending on the time of year and what is like actually happening. Like chances are, if we're in the middle of December and there's nothing going on in the MLB world, we're not going to talk about that because there's nothing going on. But if Aaron Judge goes to a different team for 9 years and $300 million, that's going to be brought up. Yeah. But if there's not anything happening, we're not going to cover it. Like every episode's going to be different. Like we'll still have some of the same segments every time. Like for example, my special segment, I don't think I should reveal this, but I'm going to anyways because you're watching the first episode. But my special segment is going to be a weekly sports take, whether it's, oh, I think the Vikings are going to win by 4 points, or whatever it is. It could be any sport, any team, any player, whatever it is. Or, oh, we'll have a weekly thing maybe where we do, I think, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Hurts, and Christian McCaffrey are going to have amazing weeks in fantasy this week. But instead, you need to sit whoever. You need to sit out Russell Wilson, and you need to sit out Hollywood Brown, and you need to sit out Zach Ertz. Like, you never know. Like, we'll have a bunch of different segments. And like that, if there's something you want to see, a certain segment, oh, you want us to cover Andrew Tate boxing Jake Paul. You want us to cover hockey. You want us to cover this big trade in hockey. Whatever it is, just comment it down below and we'll cover it. Like, we're not limited to just what we listed. Like, we're open to go over whatever. Like, this is not just an MLB or an NFL or an NBA or a college or a fantasy podcast. This is a sports in general podcast. We've just like specified it down to those things, but that's not what we're limited to. We're a very broad topic.
Yeah, we're very open to, researching different stuff and learning more and covering stuff that obviously the viewers want to see, because, without viewers, I mean, really, what's the point of doing it? Like, we want to share our ideas and entertain people. So we're very open to different stuff, and suggestions are extremely helpful and definitely welcome. So, maybe if you got a team that isn't our favorite team, we'll look up stuff about them and learn more and kind of cover some of the stuff going on. So
exactly. And like that, if it's like closer to the MLB or NBA trade deadline, we'll say, oh, okay, these are 5 players that I think are going to get traded and possible like areas that they could go to, like what will fit them best or stuff like that. Like, it's going to be literally different every week. Like, there's so many possibilities for us. Like, you should tune in because these opportunities are like great, and every episode will be different.
Yeah. We just want to thank you guys so much for watching this, if you're watching it, and supporting us. If you got friends or family that are sports lovers, we'd really appreciate it if you shared our videos and maybe got them on to listening to our podcast. Also, we got Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. We would really appreciate if you guys went over and followed them there. On TikTok, you'll see some of our shorter content, like little interviews with players and that kind of stuff. So make sure you look into that stuff.
And like that, there'll be clips of, oh, let's just say whoever got traded in the MLB, where there might be a clip of that from the podcast where we talk about it. There might be a clip of that on TikTok of the podcast, like a clip out. Like, we could do stuff like that, like clip outs, and it's not just limited to that. But our tentative schedule for now is that we're going to try to upload every Saturday. I don't know what time yet. The times will probably vary, but every Saturday at some point there will be a podcast up. And the short form content, that's whenever if we have a clip from a podcast or whatever, we might post it early, or if we go to a game or whatever, that'll be varied depending on what we do.
Yeah. Well,
thank you guys for watching the podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like and follow us on all of our social medias, Vibe with the 315, and we're out.